see that okay?
There you go. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Katie, for inviting me and for having me here with you all. I feel like this is, any NAMI sponsored presentation feels very comfortable for me, and I'll share with you a little bit about some of my experiences with NAMI. I wanted to start out by just sharing with you a very brief essay that I wrote a little while ago, but it says a lot about sort of my philosophy, and it's called How We Think About Mental Illness, Time for Plan B. So depending on who you talk to, there are dramatically different views of mental illness. One scenario which captures the unpleasant reality many have experienced looks something like this, and I'll call this Plan A. In Plan A, many people with a mental illness have never been diagnosed. Many have received a diagnosis, but they may have a lack of insight or deny it. Many are afraid to talk about it. Many are ashamed to disclose it. Many never seek treatment for it. Many are ridiculed and ostracized because of it. Many want treatment, but none is available. Many have the wrong diagnosis. Many receive ineffective treatment. Many feel hopeless because they can't manage it. Many don't believe recovery is possible. Many are trapped in despair, and many die prematurely due to a lack of appropriate health care or by suicide. Conversely, there's a very different view of mental illness, which paints a much more positive picture of hope and recovery. And I like to call this Plan B. In Plan B, many people with a mental illness learn they have a treatable illness. Many acknowledge they have it. Many talk openly about it with no fear or shame. Many want to learn more about it. Many readily seek treatment for it. Many find help and support is available to treat it. Many find caring professionals who want to help them. Many have an accurate diagnosis. Many engage in effective treatment. Many feel hopeful about effectively managing it. Many believe recovery is possible. Many realize they are a person and not just an illness. Many reclaim their lives and experience peace of mind and fulfillment. Most would agree that Plan A has been far too common in the past and that it's definitely time for Plan B. The question then becomes how to make Plan B our collective vision for the future. Notable efforts are already underway to achieve this goal, including adoption of the recovery model, expanded mental health insurance benefits, increased attention to suicide prevention, and incredible work by mental health advocates around the world. Perhaps we're nearing a tipping point in how we think about mental illness, where we can say once and for all that Plan A is in the past and Plan B is here to stay. So I think, hopefully, I would love to see our Plan B come to more fruition. So what I'd like to do is, and I would like to make this a conversation. I can't really, see everyone. So if Katie, if somebody wants to jump in and, has a comment or question, just jump right in and let me know, please, because I would really like to have a conversation and not just have me do all the talking. But I do have a few goals we can start with, and then we can see where this goes. But I wanted to just talk a little bit about advocacy, what it is, why it's important, talk about some practical ways to either get started in advocacy or to perhaps go to the next level in advocacy. I wanted to focus a little bit specifically also on legislative advocacy, since that's an important thing that a lot of us are interested in, and then how to access perhaps some resources that may be less familiar. So those are kind of the things I wanted to touch on. I did want to say a little bit about my journey to just give you a sense of kind of who I am. Katie had a wonderful introduction. Thank you for that. My professional career as a clinical psychologist, the bulk of it was in inpatient psychiatric care in a public state psychiatric hospital here in Lexington, Kentucky, where I worked for almost 25 years. And so over that course of time, we had a very large state hospital that served almost half the state of Kentucky. We would see usually well over 2,000 people a year coming through. So in my time there, I was fortunate to be able to, help provide care for probably well over 50,000 people that came through our doors. And we saw a lot of people with serious and severe mental illness, with substance use disorders, and with all kinds of challenges. And one of the, I think, turning points in our approach to care was we did develop a new recovery and rehabilitation program called the Recovery Mall, which we opened in 2006. And I was fortunate to be the first director of that program. And so that was really an attempt to embrace recovery in the inpatient setting and to try to really provide a broader array of education, classes, groups, activities, and programs to help our folks in the hospital on their journey of recovery. And it was also really an attempt to infuse the recovery model throughout the hospital. So I think it was a paradigm shift and a turning point. Our hospital is the second oldest psychiatric hospital in America. It opened its doors in 1824. It's never closed its doors. And so obviously it came through many, many different eras of treatment. There's a lot of history there, of course, but I think this was a big step forward. And it was also probably the first time that the hospital had systematically collaborated with our local NAMI Lexington chapter. And so that was an opportunity for me to learn a lot more about NAMI and about our local chapter. And they came on board and helped us do the planning for our rehabilitation program, and actually then began to supply peer support specialists and other NAMI staff and volunteers to actually come in and work in the program in a collaborative relationship with us in the hospital. So again, I think that was another huge turning point. A few years later, we did open the first campus chapter of NAMI in the state of Kentucky at the University of Kentucky. And I have been the faculty sponsor of the campus chapter since they started several years ago. So I've been able to work with NAMI very closely for about 15 years now. Along the way, I also began to get more involved in state and federal legislative advocacy, and I'll say a little bit more about that. But that's been not only in collaboration with some of the NAMI initiatives, but also through my professional organizations. As a clinical psychologist, I work very closely with the Kentucky Psychological Association and also with the American Psychological Association. So if you hear me say KPA or APA, I'm referring to one of our psychological associations, and we have a lot of advocacy initiatives that come out of those groups. I also got involved about 10 years ago with a group here in Kentucky called Health Literacy Kentucky, which is advocacy of a different kind because it looks at the issue of limited health literacy, which, as you know, a lot of people really struggle with their ability to understand healthcare information and, to try to sort out really technical language as you navigate through the healthcare system and to understand sometimes really complicated information. So the purpose of this group has been to try to reduce barriers to access, to improve health communication, to try to make communication more clear, more simple. And so this is a sort of multidisciplinary group of people from many different backgrounds that have joined together to work on this issue of health literacy. Also in my faculty work at the University of Kentucky, and I left the state hospital in 2016 after almost 25 years there, and took a full-time faculty position here at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, and I'm now on faculty in the psychology department. We have a clinical psychology training program, so we train graduate students who desire to be clinical psychologists. So my work is really, my academic work is largely focused on training the next generation of clinical psychologists. And so in that setting, I decided that we needed to start a graduate student advocacy group. And so we now have an interest group for our graduate students if they want to get involved and learn more about advocacy. And we teach them things about legislative advocacy and community outreach and public education. And we give them sort of a chance to get their feet wet in the advocacy world, which they all enjoy. They love it. And then finally, I got involved in mental health social media and blogging probably the end of 2014 or 2015. And I just decided I wanted to start a mental health advocacy and wellness blog. And so I began, posting things, writing articles, this kind of thing, and then, got into some through platforms like Facebook and later Twitter and Instagram. And I'll say more about that later. But I think there's a lot of power and impact through social media, and particularly as a venue for mental health advocacy. And so it gives us yet another sort of tool in the toolbox, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's just a little bit about my background. So when I think about advocacy, I think it involves kind of two key parts, and one is getting informed, getting better informed, and then the second part is to then learn how to get involved. And so I'd like to kind of break it into those two parts as we go along. And so let's first talk about. But first, before we do that, I want to just drop in sort of an important message, because I think in the times that we're in right now, with everything that's going on in the world and everything that's gone on over the past year or so now, with the pandemic and with our systemic racism and all the many things that we're dealing with, I just want to remind all of us that I think self-care is the first step to effective advocacy. And if you'll remember the oxygen mask analogy, if anytime you've been on an airplane, what do they tell you? Well, when the mask comes down, first you put it over yourself, and then you help those who are near you. And so I think that's important for us to remember, that we need to take care of ourselves first, or we're not going to be very good advocates for anyone else. And so I do think we need to be thinking about self-care. I see it as a holistic kind of thing. It really embraces mind and body and spirit, all those different elements. I think self-care has to be intentional. You have to give some thought to it. You have to have some desire to take care of yourself, and then you have to be planful about it. You have to take some steps to make sure that you're incorporating self-care into your routine. I think self-care is also an ongoing journey. It keeps changing. We keep trying different things, but we need to keep self-care front and center on our personal radar. And I do think that self-care is really, really vital to, our overall physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. And so, I would again just remind everyone, when you're thinking about self-care, or when you're helping other people, when you're trying to help them in some way, to kind of remember these key areas of focus. We need to remember to get our sleep and our rest. We need to remember to have some level of regular physical activity. We need to be thinking about healthy nutrition. And you notice I didn't say the word exercise, because that's a no-no. We need to think about physical activity, but we don't have to call it exercise, because there's lots of things that may be physical activity that are not really exercise. And so our nutrition, and then think about our spirituality, however we choose to express that, or our faith beliefs, whatever that may be. Think about our social connections. We've been incredibly isolated this past year. We've had all kinds of challenges in terms of not being able to be socially connected. And so we need to remember, how important that is. You need to inject a little humor into our lives. On my personal Facebook page, I do a really bad dad joke or a pun pretty much every day of the week. And I now have sort of a group of friends who chime in and have equally bad dad jokes in return. So, you need to think a little bit about humor. Also, think about mindfulness. Think about things like meditation, or just taking a moment to center yourself or be focused in a mindful kind of way. And then, of course, last but not least, to remember that we need to avail ourselves of peer support and professional support when we need it or when others need it. And so all of these things, I think, are really, really important in terms of our self-care. So why advocacy? Why do we even want to be involved in advocacy? This is a nice quote from a psychologist colleague who said, "We are charged to ally with, advocate for, and at times become activists to improve the condition of individuals, organizations, and society." And I think we would all probably agree there's a lot of things going on, and a lot of things that we need to change, and a lot of things that really need to get better. And so advocacy is very much a hot topic right now, I think, in many, many different ways. I like these kind of definitions. They're somewhat flexible, but it gives you just sort of a starting place. You'll hear these terms. An ally can be described as a person, a group, or a nation that's associated with another or others for some common cause or purpose. And so you will hear this applied to different kinds of things. You'll often hear, for example, people say that they may be a LGBTQ ally, or that kind of thing. Another term you hear a lot is an activist, a person who campaigns to bring about political or social change. And you may have that image of someone, out at a large march or rally, and they're carrying a sign, or they're, giving a speech in front of a large group, that kind of thing. So that may be one form of activism. And then the term advocate, and this is one that I think can apply to really all of us, but an advocate can be anyone who argues the case of another, one who speaks in support of something, or a person who supports others to make their voices heard, or ideally to speak up for themselves. And so I really like that, because I think we can all be advocates in many different ways, even in just our everyday lives, with our friends, with our family, with our neighbors, with our loved ones. But we can also do it on a larger scale. And we'll talk about kind of all those different options and avenues where you may be just advocating very privately with a few people that you really care about, or you may be advocating on a larger, more public scale to really try to bring out some larger impact. And so then, why mental health advocacy in particular? Why are all of us here? Why do we care about mental health? Why do we want to improve things? Well, because we know that there's still a great amount of need. And we know that a lot of people still aren't getting the treatment that they need. We know that a lot of our programs are still inadequately funded, and many of them still face jeopardy from further cuts. We also know that the discrimination is still real. It's still out there, and that people with mental illness experience significant discrimination. I will often use the term stigma, of course, but I've kind of come to feel like discrimination is probably a more accurate term, because if you think about what people with mental illness experience, it's really the same as other types of discrimination. And people are affected by thoughtless attitudes and beliefs and language and behaviors, and they're denied opportunities. And so it really is, I believe, just another type of discrimination that our friends and family members with mental illness often experience. We also know still that many of our people with more serious and severe mental illness are still homeless, or they may be incarcerated. And so those continue to be large groups of people that obviously need more support. And we know, unfortunately, that suicides continue to increase. And if we look at the data, which is always a year or two behind, the numbers keep going up every year. And we saw more than 48,000 in 2018. This was just in the United States, numbers of suicide. And then, of course, the perfect storm, now we add on all the pandemic-related mental health concerns from the past year. And we've already seen a number of pretty large-scale studies and surveys coming out that show us dramatic increases in depression and in anxiety and in social isolation. And then, of course, you add all the grief and loss that people have experienced from losing loved ones to COVID, and from just health issues, long-term health issues that many people are experiencing, even if they're surviving the virus. So as if we didn't have enough things to worry about, we've got even more things to worry about. And then you think about all the stress from systemic racism as well. So to say that this has not been a great year for mental health would be a bit of an understatement, I think. And then why you? Why are you a great advocate for mental health? And this is actually, if you look close, that's me in the picture. That's my wife to my side, and some of our friends. This was at one of our NAMI Lexington walks a few years ago. But why you? Why are you a great advocate? Because you're knowledgeable about mental health issues from your experiences. You've lived through a lot of this. You know about things from your own personal life or the experiences of those really close to you. You have a passion to help others. You want to make a difference. You have excellent communication skills. And the public and the people who are making the policies and laws, they need to be informed from reliable sources. They need to hear from people like us who maybe have taken the time to get some facts, some data, some figures that support the need for changing some of the really important initiatives that we're interested in. And so other ways to get just basically more informed, and I feel like, I'm preaching to the proverbial choir here, because I know you all are probably already quite informed about many mental health issues, but we do just have to stay abreast of current advocacy issues. We have to plug into those streams of information where we can get, updates on initiatives, legislative initiatives, or other things that are going on. We have to play to our strengths. And I think this is one people don't think about too much, but you may have unique strengths because you may have had a life experience with a mental illness. You may have had a loved one who's had that life experience. You may have had experience as a professional. You may have policy experience, but you want to play to all those strengths because sometimes those different voices are necessary to be heard in order to get to kind of that tipping point where things can change in a positive direction. And I always say we also have to acknowledge that advocacy is political in some cases because we may be going and talking with or lobbying our legislators about bills or something. And so there is that dynamic of talking to someone on, one party or the other. And so there is sort of that political thing. And also because depending on how your legislative bodies are set up, they may be controlled by one party or the other. And so you have to deal with those dynamics. But in some ways, what we're doing is also not political because I think, we can say that no matter what our personal political beliefs or persuasion may be, a lot of the things that we're fighting for, we can say we're part of the mental health party. We're part of this unified party coming from hopefully both sides of the aisle that are fighting very hard to get a lot of important changes made to really benefit the people that we care about. So I think you can take some of the politics out, and often we do find that we get good bipartisan support for many of the things that we're interested in because we're able to say that this is something that affects everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a blue state or a red state or whatever. These kind of mental health issues cut across everyone, and so we're able to, I think, make that case pretty convincingly. Okay, so before we get into getting involved, let me just take this down for a minute. And let's go back and let me just see, have we stirred up any thoughts, any questions, any comments, any conversation? And then we'll go back and pick up with some of the rest of this. Any thoughts? And they can be related or not, whatever. We'll take about 5 minutes and then we'll kind of go back into some more of the information. Anybody have thoughts, questions?
I'll just share, David. I appreciate your approach to stigma and the use of the term discrimination. It's actually a language shift that I've made over the last couple years because if it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's a duck. And so I really appreciate that's the information you're putting out there because it is discrimination.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that the term stigma is also has some, it's kind of laden with some connotations as well.
I was going to say it stigmatizes itself.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, stigma, that term's still widely used. I don't think it's probably ever going away, but it's sort of, I have a lot of pet peeves with language. The other one is like, I don't ever want people to say committed suicide because it implies like some crime was committed or somebody did something wrong. And let's just say someone died by suicide or they completed suicide so I have a whole list of language things that we could get into sometime, but I'm not quite as adamant about the stigma versus discrimination thing, but I do think discrimination is more accurate. Other thoughts?
I agree with both of you completely because I've used the analogy before about if you had 5 people all lined up and one has dementia, one has IDD, one has a substance use disorder, and you've got a mentally ill person in the lineup, and they're all experiencing the same thing, the exact same experience, everybody's going to get the help they need except the one with the mental illness. So I think that by you pointing out discrimination versus stigma, I just hadn't even thought of that. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because I'm going to shift to that language too when I talk, because that's really what it is. I agree with Katie. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, let's call it what it is. And I think that describes my frustration with our system perfectly. It's not just about stigma implies let's break the stigma by creating greater awareness. It's more than that. If you talk about it being discrimination, now we're talking about reform, something greater and bigger that needs to happen because it's really not okay. I mean, it's just not okay to have that. So I like that a lot. So that's my nugget that I've taken away so far from you.
Good. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, let's dive back in and then we'll come back out again. I just want to have some time to be able to talk a little bit. Let me get back to where I was here. Okay, so now that we're a little bit better informed, then the next question is, how do we get involved? And maybe we're already involved in a lot of things, but what are some of our options if we want to get more involved as advocates? And so I like doing lists. A lot of my posts are lists because people like lists, but here's a list of 10 ways to sort of do advocacy. People, a lot of times students will say, well, how do you do this advocacy thing? You know, how do I get involved? Where do I start? I don't know much about this. So here's a list. This is not an exhaustive list, but it is, you know, a start. And it's sort of in order from kind of like things that take a little less effort all the way down to things that take a whole lot more effort. And so, you know, you can kind of decide which ones you might already be doing or which ones you might want to try. But obviously, number one, which we just talked about, is the getting informed, learning more. You know, you got to know what's going on. You have to be current. Number two, which I can't say enough about, is networking. And so you have to just keep meeting people, interacting with people, building those collaborations, coalitions, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's one of the huge hallmarks of NAMI is NAMI's really good at the networking. And then number three, showing up and keep showing up is sort of, I didn't invent this, but it's just so important that you have a presence. And so if you're going to be an advocate, you have to have a presence, you have to be involved, you have to show up either on Zoom or in person or, you know, on social media or writing whatever you're writing or, you know, talking to people. But you have to be consistent and you have to keep showing up, because if as we know, if you give up, nothing is going to ever cross the finish line. And then number four, finding your voice, figuring out different ways to speak up, and beginning to share your opinions and beginning to decide the causes that you really want to speak up about. Number five is a pretty easy one, donating your money or time for things like groups like NAMI or, you know, in many of our worthwhile nonprofits, because, you know, the armchair ways, I can go online and donate money to NAMI or whoever I want. I know they're going to do some good things with that money. Or I can volunteer some time and I can go help them with an event, or I can ask them, do you need to, you know, have some help in the office or whatever. Number six is a really cool one because a lot of people do like to share their story, but it's a very personal decision. And by sharing your story, I'm talking about your life experience or in many cases, your own mental health journey. And if you do go look at my blog, you'll find that I've got about 100 people on there who have shared their story. And it's something that I've really featured, and I call it Stories of Hope. But I decided early on that I wanted to give a forum for people if they want to talk about their life experience with mental health. I would give them a forum for that. And so we do little Q&A interviews, print interviews, and I'll ask people questions and they'll answer them. And then we print it up and I post it with their picture and their bio and say a little bit about them. And some of these folks are already well into advocacy. Some of them have even written books, but some of them are just, you know, your normal friend or neighbor down the street, and they just have decided they're ready to share their story. And I never push that. I always say, you know, it's up to you if you want to share your story. And some of them have shared it 100 times, but some of them have decided like this would be the first sort of public time they would share their story would be through my blog. And so I'm always kind of honored when that happens. But I think it is really interesting to, if people want to share their story, if we can provide a forum for that. And, you know, NAMI has, of course, as you know, In Our Own Voice, and you've got lots of great vehicles for that kind of thing. But to give people that option and then to help support them so that it's a good experience and not one that they're going to feel went badly in some way. Writing an op-ed, a letter, a comment, you know, there's lots of forums you can write stuff online, your newspaper, whatever, get that opinion, those comments out there. And then all the social media options, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but very, very easy way to express your views, your opinions through your favorite social media platforms. And then, of course, contacting your legislators so that they know about what's important to you and the kinds of initiatives, the kind of bills that you're supporting. And then if you really get into it, you can support someone who's running for office, or you yourself might even run for office. And we have a colleague here in Kentucky who is a psychologist who actually was elected to our state House of Representatives 2.5 years ago. And so we actually have an elected psychologist in our state legislature now. And as you might imagine, she's an incredible mental health advocate. And so, every now and then you get lucky and you get some of those people in there who are going to really support almost anything that you want to support. So those are great people. If they're running for re-election, you may want to get out there and help them. And then why legislative advocacy? Let's talk about that a little bit. I know NAMI's heavily involved in legislative advocacy, and we just want to remind people government's going to happen whether we're there or not. Legislators make a lot of decisions that affect what goes on, how people are cared for, their access. It can affect our workplaces. I like this little, slogan that's, politics. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So, if you're not expressing your views, then you may be subject to just what happens. So in some ways, if we're not involved, we may end up being kind of a victim of the system, or we can make that choice to go in and really express our views to influence the system. There are, as you know, a few do's and don'ts with legislative advocacy. This is a picture of our state capitol down here in Frankfort, Kentucky. And this was from a couple years ago when we had all of our K through 12 teachers visited the Capitol, and they were trying to get, keep their pension and retirement benefits maintained. And so this was a big rally of all the school teachers. There's also, as you know, big differences between how you deal with state issues versus federal issues. Usually you have better access to your state legislators. It's a little tougher to get access to your federal folks. And Katie, do you all know who are your two senators from Ohio? I can't remember that right off.
My brain's frozen.
Yeah, I don't.
Hold on, let me think. Sherrod Brown.
Okay.
And
okay, that's a trivia question. I should have looked that up ahead of time because our two U.S. senators here in Kentucky are quite well known, Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul. So we always have something going on down here, related to those guys, because they're always in the news, right? So
Sherrod Brown and Rob Portman.
Rob Portman.
Oh, Rob Portman. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. So contacting the federal folks is more difficult. But we know that there's a lot of power in one voice, and we've certainly heard a lot of advocacy stories where you may have just a handful of people kind of share their story, and it's enough to kind of get a bill out of committee or get a bill, on the floor, or get something moving to where it's passed. So, don't forget that power of the individual. This commandments of advocacy, and also I was going to mention, Katie, I'm going to send you all these slides, and then you can send them out to everybody, because it's got stuff in here that people may want to look at, or some links or whatever. But so you'll be able to look at this later. But this is from one of my friends who's a lobbyist who also is a psychologist, and she tells us these are the commandments of advocacy. You can look at these.
Is this from Sheila?
Yeah, Sheila Schuster. Yeah, exactly. But a lot of good tips here. I won't read all these, but these are just some of the some of those things that you want to keep in mind when you're working with your legislators. And I do like her 11th commandment. Treat them as you would want to be treated, with courtesy. And she always says, send them a thank you card. So.
I haven't figured out if we have a Sheila Schuster up here, Katie. Dr. Sheila Schuster is I don't even know. She's like a nugget of gold. I think she lives at the state capitol in Frankfort, really. I think that's her home.
Yeah, her background is in, she was a child clinical psychologist, and then for whatever reason decided to become a mental health lobbyist. And so she's been doing that for 30 some years now.
She is so wonderful. And I just don't know if Ohio has anybody like her or not, but she's such a champion.
Yeah.
And so effective.
You probably got some hidden gems out there like that, I'm sure. So what about social media? I'm an old guy. I wasn't born into social media. Some of you were not as well, but I have come to appreciate social media And it does have a lot of benefits because it's very quick, it's immediate. It has a lot of reach. You can get your word out to a lot of people. You can actually have a lot of impact. It's pretty easy to do. It doesn't necessarily cost very much, and it is a great way to network. And so, after I got into blogging, I did experiment with Twitter and Facebook, and more recently Instagram, and I've kind of gotten into all of those a little bit. And I've actually met a lot of great advocates and great some, as you know, a lot of the NAMI groups are well represented in social media as well. You may have seen this picture. I like this. This is explaining social media using donuts. So, Facebook, I like donuts. Instagram, here's a picture of my donut. Twitter, I'm eating a hashtag donut. Snapchat, my donut will disappear in 5 seconds. LinkedIn, my skills include donut eating. And YouTube, here's a video of me eating a donut. So, you can just think about what's your favorite channel or flavor. And then some people are more into one than another. I mean, and it's always changing because obviously this doesn't even have Pinterest. This doesn't have TikTok, all of this stuff. I have a daughter who's a college student, and she knows way more about some of this stuff than I do. But there are, advantages to different platforms. Some have different demographics. Many of the folks, kind of my age are more on the Facebook side. A lot of the younger folks are on the TikTok or Instagram side. And so you need to think about who you're trying to reach, and then think about what's going to be the platform that may be the most accessible for whoever it is you're trying to reach. And you may want to play around and try a bunch of different ones. I do actually, I have come to appreciate Instagram a little bit more. I did set up a sort of advocacy page on Instagram. I've done a little bit with that. Twitter, I've had a pretty good amount of traction there. And there are a lot of academic psychologists on Twitter now, which is really interesting to me, talking about research. So that's been kind of more lately. I have never used Snapchat. LinkedIn, of course, is like your professional resume place, and that's great for, kind of business networking. And then if you're into, doing videos and so forth, I am not a YouTuber other than, occasionally watching a video or something, but I have not done YouTube myself. Have you all had luck with any particular social media, Katie?
So social media, it's hit or miss. There's algorithms, there's timings, time of day, content. We were doing really well on social media, specifically Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We also have a LinkedIn that gets a little bit of stuff, but people are sick of computers and social media and Zoom. And I actually was on with a nonprofit. Facebook has a concierge system for nonprofits, and I was talking to them, and they said overall across the industry they're seeing massive declines in interactions, in everything.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah. So right now everything's a little stagnant, but things were looking good before the pandemic.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, everybody's got the Zoom fatigue, I guess. I mean, in my teaching role, I've been on Zoom more hours than I care to tell you about the past year, so I'm sure many of you have had that experience, but yeah, so we'll see, I guess, how social media kind of rebounds, but I don't think social media is going away. I think it just keeps changing. So Ohio stuff, this is, you all know probably about more than I do, but these are just a few things that I'm aware of. And, if you're plugging into your local resources, obviously you guys, your NAMI and your state NAMI, and then your friends down at Mental Health America of Ohio, that's another national organization. And I find a lot of their resources really helpful. I noticed that you guys have a couple of other coalitions and councils here in Ohio. And then you've got your Ohio chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which I think maybe they have that in almost every state now as well. So, you've got local resources. And then, of course, we have more of our national resources as far as advocacy. Of course, NAMI, again, is sort of a treasure trove. Mental Health America also does a lot of national, federal advocacy stuff. You may not have heard of the APA Legislative Action Center. That's part of the American Psychological Association, which is my professional organization. But this is a pretty cool website because anybody can go on it And when you go on there, it kind of tells you like what federal legislation is being worked on that has a mental health aspect. And then from that, you can click on your state, and then it will find like those two senators you mentioned, and then it will actually pull up a little form letter about a certain bill, and then you can either use the form letter or you can customize it, and then it'll mail those letters out to your senators for you. And so, it's kind of a neat little tool. I don't know exactly how they select the bills that they have on there, but they always have like a smattering of different federal bills on there that are related to mental health issues. And it's kind of a neat way to just go and see kind of what's going on. Sometimes I'll click on there and there's stuff on there I've never even heard of. But then if it's something that I'm in support of, I'll click on the thing and I'll send my letter to Mitch McConnell or Rand Paul. And the funny thing about that, when you send these letters, you all may have done this, but eventually you do get like a little email back from their office, and it's another form letter, and they say, "Thank you for sending in your your views or whatever." So we're playing this game, I guess. Now we can send them form letters, and they can send us back a form letter. But again, it's just getting that voice out there, because when I send in my letter, I always do customize it a little bit, and I'll say, hey, I'm one of your constituents. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm living in Lexington, Kentucky. I'm working at the University of Kentucky. I'm very much in favor of this. And so at least if I say I'm their constituent, they're going to listen to me maybe a little bit more, or whoever they're, they typically have these college student staffers in the office who are really reading these emails. But that's an interesting site you might want to check out. And then I wanted to call your attention to a Facebook group that we started a couple years ago that's called Mental Health Advocates International. And so this is a Facebook group that I and a few people started maybe 3 years ago, something like that. But it's just a kind of a place for mental health advocates to get together and post things and hang out. And I don't know why we decided to call it Mental Health Advocates International, but because of that, we actually have gotten a lot of international members. And so there are members from probably a couple dozen countries on there. And when I looked on there a few days ago, we actually have over 3,000 members in the group now. So, it's a pretty good sized group. You might check that out sometime. And then the Treatment Advocacy Center, you've probably heard of that. They're often involved in a lot of things like assisted outpatient treatment and some of those kinds of things. And they tend to be quite active in a lot of the federal policy initiatives. Are there, let me ask you again, Katie or Kim, are there other like national resources that you guys go to a lot?
It's kind of hit or miss. It's really dependent on what specifically I'm looking for. Like,
Yeah.
Obviously there are other national resources, but it really, like I said, it just depends on what I'm looking for.
Yeah. I think that's true. Sometimes I have to go dig around to try to find some background information.
You know what I miss, and I don't know if we have it here in Ohio or not. Katie, you can maybe answer this question, but do you know how in Kentucky, David, we always get those alerts? They usually came out through NAMI Lexington, and I'm sure that Sheila pushed those to them.
Yeah.
But I would get those, and I always paid attention to those because we never received unimportant stuff through those alerts or junk. It was always like, you need to stop what you're doing and look at that alert and take action. And I always did. I always looked at it, and it would say, you need to call your state senator by this date, or you need to, send this letter by the. I always did it. I didn't always take the time to individualize it like you do, because I just wanted to hurry get my count in, because they're going to count my, they're going to count how many people responded or whatever.
That's right.
And I don't know, Katie, do you know if we have anything like that in Ohio? These alerts that came through when we need to take action to call our senators on a particular bill that's about to be voted on.
So NAMI Ohio fills that gap a little bit.
I haven't gotten one, so I guess I don't know how to access the listserv to get those, because I miss those. That's what kept me involved and informed in Kentucky a lot.
I believe they actually currently have a vacancy in the role that was doing the advocacy piece. And so that may be why you haven't received it. But I know on a national side, NAMI National sends those out quite frequently.
And I have tried to join that list serve too, and I don't know if I'm not doing something right or if they just haven't sent something out because I haven't gotten anything. So
I can help you with that tomorrow.
okay.
Yeah, I do think those are great. If you can find out, who's tracking that stuff, and a lot of times you will have sometimes agencies or lobbyists or whoever, and then they'll put out like a little email news kind of thing, and it tells you, yeah, this is the bill you need to call in on or whatever. So yeah, I think it's great to get plugged into those.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to highlight, I've now met, I don't know how many dozens and dozens of advocates from not only around America, but from other countries. And I think that's another cool thing too. So just get to know more advocates who are doing stuff all over. How many of you know Gabe Howard? You guys know Gabe? Yeah, okay. So Gabe is one of your, he's in Columbus, I think, right?
Yes.
And, Gabe, I interviewed him on my blog, and he's written a book, and he does the Psych Central podcast. And I mean, Gabe gets around, let me tell you. And he's, also just a really, funny, nice guy. But, that's an example of somebody you have kind of more locally. You may have heard of Kevin Hines. Kevin jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, survived that, had this obviously kind of epiphany, and is now a suicide prevention advocate, and has written his memoir and has done a couple documentaries, which have been very well publicized. And, so Kevin is really great in the suicide prevention space. I don't know if you know Amy Gamble or not. Amy's over in West Virginia, in the Wheeling, West Virginia area. She was with NAMI Wheeling, I think, for a while. And so Amy was a college basketball player at the University of Tennessee. And then she later became an Olympic handball player. So she was in the Olympics. She then developed bipolar disorder and had quite a rough time of several years and sort of a lot of challenges with that. But she's now gotten into mental health advocacy. She does a lot of keynotes. If you ever need a good keynote speaker, Amy is really, really good. And she's written this book about bipolar disorder, My Biggest Competitor, which is a great, great book to read. So, she may be somebody else to get to know. Obviously, we know about Rosalind Carter, Jimmy Carter's wife, and she's had a long, long history of mental health advocacy. She wrote this book a few years ago called Within Our Reach, Ending the Mental Health Crisis, which if you haven't read that, it's a great book. It's not a really long book, but it's a great little book, and it's also a great little introductory kind of book if you want to, kind of educate people about sort of a lot of the basic issues. I don't know if you know Brian Cuban. You might know Brian's brother, Mark Cuban, who's on Shark Tank. But Brian is an attorney who had quite a lot of trouble with addiction himself. And so he's written this book called The Addicted Lawyer. Brian also has in the past had body dysmorphic disorder and wrote a book about that, which is, somewhat a little bit more unusual for males. But Brian also does talks about mental health advocacy, and he's pretty active on social media. We had him talk down here at the University of Kentucky 2 or 3 years ago, and I had a chance to meet him. And then, of course, Patrick Kennedy, who was Ted Kennedy's son, or is Ted Kennedy's son, has also written his story about his struggles with mental illness and addiction. And as you may know, Patrick has founded the Kennedy Forum. And so that's another kind of large scale mental health advocacy organization that, does a lot of stuff at the national level. So I do think it's good to kind of plug in, get to know some of these advocacy, representatives who are out there kind of fighting the good fight along with all the rest of us. So what might be some next action steps? We just kind of talked about this first one, getting Kim signed up on the advocacy mailing list so she can get all the bill alerts, would be a good one. So you can plug into all those listservs, and you can, get information sort of gently deposited in your inbox, so you can kind of know what's going on. Plugging into some of the advocacy social media, seeing what's going on out there, where different people are, what they're doing. And then, I throw this out a lot, like within schools or within businesses or other organizations, which may not, like their main thing may not really be mental health advocacy, but I'll suggest to them for them to consider developing an advocacy team or an advocacy group. And you might actually do that, within your NAMI work. You might help some schools or businesses actually start a small advocacy group or team. And you just have to get a small group of people together who really care about mental health and help them establish some broad goals and think about their mission, their values, and figure out what they might want to do or who they might want to support. And that's kind of what I did with my grad students. I said, hey guys, let's get some of you guys together if you're interested in mental health advocacy, and we'll just get a little group going. And so that's kind of where that started. And then decide what kind of events or organizations you might want to support. Our grad students have done the NAMI walk. They've volunteered at our domestic violence shelter program. They've done a clothing drive for our state hospital. They've done education for our campus fraternities and sororities. Right now during COVID, they're doing an online Zoom coping skills class for a couple agencies in town. And so you have to just give people a little bit of a little push and a little forum and a little organization, but you can pretty quickly help somebody get a advocacy group going. And there's a lot more advocacy training out there. You guys probably know about the NAMI Smarts program, which is, kind of a dedicated advocacy program or advocacy training program. So, you might think about, are there churches, are there schools, are there businesses where somebody might be interested in starting a little mental health advocacy team or group? So people often say the mental health system is broken. I kind of tend to agree with that in part, but a part of me kind of rankles when I hear that, because I think a lot of things about the mental health system are really great and helpful to people. But I do feel like there's obviously room for improvement. And so I will say that I think there are still a lot of things we can fix or make better. And I really feel like the key to that is through advocacy, because through advocacy is how we raise awareness. It's how we educate people. It's how we bring more voices to the table in terms of inclusion. It's how we build coalitions and we have more collaboration. It's how we, and this is a big one, I think we need to bring a little bit more civility back to our conversations among each other. And a little more compassion. And then, of course, we need to keep lobbying for funding. We have to get more money for programs that really need that. So taking that consistent action, and then, as I said, keep showing up, be persistent. And then through all that, the cornerstone, I think, is this brings hopefully a sense of positive outcomes and a sense of hope for the future. So I really do kind of see advocacy as the thread through which we can address a lot of these larger scale issues, and through in ways that we can hopefully bring about a lot of positive change. And so again, for me, that formula is we need to be well informed, and then we need to be consistently involved. And so I think those for me are kind of those two cornerstones for advocacy. Okay, so I will take down these slides, and then if we still have a few minutes, we can chat a little bit more. We can see if there are other comments or questions. If you want to locate me, and I'll send you all these slides, but I've listed my email here. And then if you want to go visit my blog, or if you want to try to track me down on social media, you can do that and reach out to me anytime that you like. So let me stop this. And let's see, what ideas does this bring up? Or what thoughts do you have? Or questions, comments, feedback?
Hi, David.
Hi.
Thanks. First of all, thanks for being here. I appreciate you jumping on and kind of educating us a little bit and giving us your experience. My
Thank you.
question is, as a young advocate, I'm 26 and I've worked in the field for about 3 years now. So I'm wondering if there's anything you wish you would have known, or just thoughts in general for anybody really, but as a young advocate trying to start a career in this.
Yeah, I mean, boy, what is that saying? Sometimes we don't know what we don't know, right? So, yeah, there are a lot of things that it took me a long time to figure out, and I'm still figuring out a lot of things. But I love it when I talk to people, who are in their teens and 20s because I think you've got a lot of energy and vitality, and you bring a sort of freshness to the conversation. And I'm finding it really encouraging that it seems like your generation is more open and is more willing to talk about things, and it's more willing in some cases to reach out for help when it's needed. And so I think someone of your age and generation can also be a great role model for others who may be, similar to you in some ways. And so your voice is really critical. I mean, I don't know that I have any like super specific recommendations for you, but I would say, your voice is really, really important. And you can have more impact with like, teens or young adults than obviously I can, because you're going to relate to them and on a different level. So again, that idea of playing to your strengths and thinking about, who might be the people that I could reach out to that I really care about, where I might want to make that greater impact. Does that help any?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Even just thinking about, can I make a greater impact on a specific group of people rather than trying to be everything for everyone kind of thing, which I think a lot of us advocates might relate to. I hope I'm not the only one.
Yeah, and I think, sometimes people have carved out a little niche of, people that they want to work with, like maybe troubled teens or something, or, find a group or a school or somewhere that will let you come in and provide some information or do a little talk or get a little group of kids going in school that are interested in mental health issues. And you may be surprised how much traction you get.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh yeah. What else?
Well, I'll just go along with what Lindsay asked and say, how do you get young people engaged? How do you get them to what are ways that we can convey? Because the work that you've done at the college, obviously you have an idea of how to do that, but I find that a lot of times, at the age of 20, 25, the world seems simple and everything can go the way it needs to go. And so they don't need to do anything because it'll be fine. And so how do we get that age group engaged in advocacy?
Yeah, Kay, that's a great question, because I have, my clinical work was all with adults 18 and up, and a lot of them were, all age groups and so forth. But when I started doing the NAMI campus chapter, these are like 18 to 21-year-olds primarily, and so it was definitely a different demographic. But I just found they were really eager. They were just eager, and it was usually they came to it because of a personal connection. And so I think sometimes if you can look for those personal connections, and the personal connection for them is either it's been themselves or someone they care about has had mental health issues. And that's where their passion comes from, I think. And then I think also, obviously, like in all things, but parents and our upbringing has a role in some of this, right? And so some of them came to it because like their parents were just super advocates already, and they felt like, well, I just need to get involved too, or I need to, put myself out there. But I do think the personal connection works well, and I found that really works well because like yourself, I've worked with nonprofits and other groups, and you're always needing more help, and you're needing recruits, and you're needing committee members, you're needing board members, and all this stuff, right? And I've always found that, and I actually helped develop a membership recruitment thing with our state psychology association, and it was successful largely because of we started calling people on the phone, or we'd say, hey, let's go have coffee. And we were just trying to get them to join our association, like psychologists joining another psychology association. But if we would, sit down and have coffee and say, hey, did you know that they're doing all this stuff and they're advocating to, have more benefits for your practice? And there's all these, they have all these special interest groups for young psychologists. And once you would explain it to them, they're like, I don't know why I haven't joined. What do I need to do to join? so I do think if you can personalize it.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And so each age group is probably going to have different ways you can connect. So think about that. Think about, the group and what their demographics are and their age and their background and all those different things. Because if you can, and I think sometimes if the messenger can connect, so like maybe, if you're trying to attract more young males, maybe you send a younger male to go talk to them. So try to connect like in that way too. Good question.
Thank you.
Other thoughts, comments, feedback?
Yeah, hi, David. Joe Wilbert here. I just want to say, I don't really have a question or anything, but I did want to say thank you for the information you provided. I came here today because I wanted to learn about where we could get more resources, better resources, more reliable information for advocacy. The extent of my advocacy usually is like if I'm on Facebook and I see somebody post something, I share it, and that's about all I've been able to do. So I was looking for some resources and just want to say thank you for the information you provided.
Oh, thank you. And the other way I sometimes characterize advocacy is think of it as a mini habit, MINI, a mini habit. And so maybe you decide, okay, I'm going to devote 5 minutes twice a week to advocacy. And so it's, sharing something on Facebook or retweeting or posting but if you commit yourself and you do 5 minutes twice a week, you're probably going to find that, oh, I could do 5 minutes 3 times a week, or I could do 10 minutes twice a week. And so I like that. It's a sort of interesting model of habit formation, where if you start with a very, very small goal where you almost can't fail, then sometimes you build on that. And there's a guy who's written a couple of books about many habits, and he talks about how he started doing 1 push-up a day, and this, morphed into like this huge physical activity regimen over the next couple of years for him. But, start little, start small.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Al's giving me the thumbs up. Thank you, Al.
Well, and I'll just comment along with that, David, as it's interesting. I think for a lot of people, myself included, advocacy is banging down the door of your state house. Advocacy is, really in my mind, it's always something a lot more active, but it really is sharing something on social media and sending that quick email to your representatives. And I think that's a massive shift for me, as well as I think for a lot of nonprofit, whatever your area is in nonprofit, that's a shift. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your mini habits.
Yeah, and I if you go on my blog, I've got a blog post about the mini habits. I've also got one about something like how to do advocacy in your jammies at home. And then I've got another one like how to do advocacy if you have to be fully dressed. And so, you can kind of divide it that way too. Like, okay, some things I can do in my jammies, nobody's going to know. So, I mean, I think you have to just think more broadly. I mean, advocacy can be all kinds of things, and it all adds up. So just, there's lots of different ways. And I think that's sometimes also the way to hook people in, because people are busy and they're like, no, I don't want to be on a committee. I'm like, well, could you like retweet something twice a day for me? And they're like, oh yeah, I could do that. So, think in terms of, that might be another way to engage like NAMI volunteers. Like maybe you just get a couple volunteer social media managers who just sit around at home in their jammies and they just retweet a bunch of stuff for you.
Absolutely. Or have the sole role of engaging on your posts so that it goes up in the algorithm, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, right.
That's
And I don't
really
even fully
I like
understand all that stuff, but yeah, I know SEO and all that stuff. Yeah. Well, Katie, I know that we're at 10 minutes past the hour. I don't want to like keep you guys too long. Is there anything else anybody else wants to bring up?
I appreciate you. If anybody else has anything to say, comments, please feel free. If not, all right. I think
I'll
that's
just say it's been so great to see you, David.
Likewise, Kim.
I miss Kentucky. I miss it. Just seeing you makes me miss Kentucky.
Well, things are slowly opening up. Come on down and see us.
I'm gonna have to come soon. There's just too many things I'm missing, you know. I need to see some people, you know, and
Yeah, it's, going to be Derby here in a couple weeks. So,
I know. I know all things Kentucky.
yeah.
The bourbon, all of it.
No, you can get bourbon here. We have it in Ohio.
I
Yeah, I think-
have some. I have some here.
I
It-
think
but
they sell Kentucky bourbon up in Ohio now.
I have some, yeah.